Hello and welcome to Lost Love Mystery, where we explore the twists and turns of love, the pain of betrayal, and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart. Meet Julian. He wants to talk about something that grates on his nerves: how quick people are to judge. They size you up in a heartbeat based on your clothes, your company, where you're standing, and boom, they've decided who you are. You might think that kind of thing is outdated, but if you've ever been dismissed or spoken down to, you know it's alive and well. Julian's sister's father-in-law gave him the cold shoulder at his sister's wedding, acting like he was invisible, only to become overly friendly when he learned who Julian really was. Julian returned the favor, naturally. To understand why the father reacted so swiftly, we need to go back to the beginning. Julian and his sister, Sophia, were raised by their dad. Their mom left when they were little, remarried, and started a new life elsewhere. It was just the three of them, and honestly, they were okay. Their dad was a small business owner. He had his ups and downs, but he always made sure they had what they needed. He was a hard worker, and even though he wasn't perfect, he was always there. They thought things would always be this way. Then, one morning, their lives shattered. Julian was almost done with college, just a few months away from graduating. Sophia was finishing her senior year of high school. Julian remembers the phone call that told him about the car accident. Their dad was gone. You can never truly prepare for that kind of news. When someone tells you your father is suddenly gone, it breaks something inside you. Julian drove home in a daze. Sophia was waiting. He had to tell her. She broke down in his arms. But the grief was only the beginning. It turned out their dad had significant debts tied to his business, missed loan payments, and serious financial trouble. He'd kept quiet. As soon as the banks heard about his death, they moved fast. They seized the house, the cars, the office building, everything. Within weeks, everything they had was gone. No savings, just the clothes in their suitcases and two grieving siblings trying to figure out what to do next. Julian will never forget the moment after the funeral when everyone had left, and it was just him and Sophia. That's when it truly hit him. They were all they had left. After burying their dad, Julian didn't have the luxury of prolonged grief. He was the only one left to care for Sophia. While other students were planning graduation parties and internships, Julian was facing a future dominated by rent, food, and bills. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't fail. He pushed through college, barely. He took any job he could find. During the day, he was a student. At night, he was a barista, a delivery driver, a temporary office assistant. You name it, he probably did it. There were days he didn't sleep, leaving for work before sunrise and returning after midnight. His body was exhausted, but his mind never stopped racing. He had to ensure Sophia had what she needed. Every penny he earned was stretched thin. Of course, juggling all of that took its toll. For Julian, it was his relationship. He had a girlfriend back then, sweet and initially supportive. But slowly, the late replies, missed calls, and last-minute cancellations piled up. She'd say things like, "You're never really present," or, "I feel like I'm not a priority." And he understood. It wasn't fair to her. She wanted a boyfriend who could be there emotionally and physically, but at that point, Julian's energy was completely depleted. He had nothing left to give anyone else. So, he broke things off, not because he stopped caring, but because he knew where his focus had to be. He had to give everything he had to one thing: getting Sophia and himself out of that hole. He told himself, there will be time for love later. Right now, she needs me more. After college, Julian landed a corporate job, just something to pay the bills and provide some stability. He wasn't passionate about it, but he couldn't afford to wait for the perfect opportunity. He had bills to pay and a little sister counting on him. Even while working the 9 to 5, he made it a point to keep learning, taking online courses, and earning certifications, anything that could give him an edge when it came time for promotions. He needed to earn more, save more, and plan better for Sophia's future. Then, one day, he found out that two of his old college buddies were working on a software project. They were developing an AI-based tool for automating back-end workflows. It sounded ambitious, but something about it intrigued him. He reached out and asked if they needed help. He wasn't an AI expert, but he had business sense, marketing skills, and, most importantly, he was driven to build something of his own. That's how he joined them. The startup became his side hustle. He'd go to his corporate job during the day, come home exhausted, and then spend nights and weekends working on this project. It wasn't glamorous, and there were times he'd fall asleep on his laptop, wake up with a stiff neck, and still push through. He was doing everything he could to keep himself and Sophia afloat. The early stages of the startup were tough. There were technical issues, disagreements over features, and more than a few nights when they thought the whole thing might collapse. One of the co-founders, a good friend, got tired of the constant struggle and left after about 2 years. Julian didn't blame him. They'd poured a lot of time and money into it, and the returns just weren't there yet. Julian honestly considered quitting too. There were days he'd look at his bank account and wonder if he was chasing a pipe dream. He had already lost so much money and sleep. But something inside him kept pushing. He kept telling himself, if this works, it changes everything. And finally, it did. They launched a new feature, an automated logic engine that allowed companies to streamline their internal workflows. Clients loved it. Slowly at first, then suddenly all at once, word started to spread. They were getting calls, emails, and demo requests. Industry blogs picked up on what they were doing. It felt surreal. After all the setbacks and sleepless nights, people were finally noticing. But even then, Julian didn't quit his corporate job right away. He was still playing it safe, still watching every dollar. His co-founder, the one who stuck it out, became the public face of the company. He handled the networking events, the interviews, and the speaking gigs. Julian was fine with that. He didn't care about the spotlight. He was the guy in the background, making sure things ran smoothly, handling the operational grind, and keeping things afloat. Looking back, Julian realized that those years shaped him more than anything else. The pressure, the sacrifices, the stubborn belief that he could do both, build a business and be there for his sister, they all molded him into who he is now. One day, Julian had just gotten home from work, barely had time to sit down, when Sophia called. She sounded like she had something big to say, but wasn't sure how to start. That alone made him pause. Then she told him, "Julian, I'm getting married." He blinked, thinking he'd misheard. He knew she was seeing someone. Sure, they talked, but marriage? That soon. He'd barely even memorized the guy's name. Naturally, he started asking questions. He trusted Sophia, but he needed to understand what was happening. He asked how long she'd been serious and why things were moving so fast. That's when she told him they'd actually known each other for years. Apparently, they reconnected after college and had been serious for a while before she even mentioned him. He could tell she was genuinely happy, and that mattered more than his personal timeline. She also said her fiancé wanted to meet him. Of course, Julian said yes. He's the only family she really has, and if someone's going to marry his sister, he better be willing to have a conversation with him first. So, they set up a casual dinner. When Julian opened the door and saw the guy's face, something clicked. He knew he'd seen him before. They shook hands, sat down, talked, and that's when Julian connected the dots. It turned out his father is one of the major clients. In fact, his father had been aggressively trying to buy them out for the past few months. But Julian hadn't thought much of the man beyond business. And now, here he was, sitting across from his son, who wanted to marry his sister. That information was a bit of a jolt. Julian didn't show it, though. He just listened and tried to understand what kind of man this fiancé really was, outside of who his father was. Because let's be honest, parents don't always define their children. Sophia must have sensed his hesitation because after the meeting, she pulled him aside and reassured him. She told him she wasn't being pushed or rushed. She said she'd known him long enough to trust him and that the timing felt right to her. And when Julian looked in her eyes, he could see she meant it. The first time Julian met Sophia's soon-to-be father-in-law was during the wedding planning phase, one of those family meet-and-greet situations. Julian didn't go in expecting a royal welcome, but he definitely wasn't prepared for how cold the man came off right from the start. The moment Julian walked in, he could feel the man sizing him up with his eyes before even saying a word. He barely even looked at Julian when he introduced himself. At some point in the conversation, he tilted his head slightly and said, "Oh, you're just her brother. I assumed her father would be here." It was one of those statements where the words sound innocent on paper, but sting in person. It was like Julian wasn't enough to represent their side of the family. Julian took a breath and told him plainly, "My father passed away many years ago." The man barely reacted, just moved on, and asked what Julian did for a living. Now, here's the thing. At that moment, Julian knew exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. The type who wants to know your title, your salary range, who you know, and what circles you move in before deciding if you're worth talking to. Julian could sense he was already trying to put him in a box. Still, he wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of a performance, so he kept it simple. He just told him, "I work a corporate job at the moment." The man nodded slightly, but didn't say much in response. So Julian smiled. He had a feeling the day would come when that same man would look at him very differently. The wedding day finally arrived. It was one of those beautiful afternoons where everything felt right. Sophia looked stunning. You could tell she was happy, and that was all Julian wanted for her. He was making small talk with a few guests when the father-in-law walked past. Now, keep in mind, Julian was standing right there. The man glanced over, met his eyes for half a second, then looked away. It was obvious, intentional, and, to be honest, unnecessary. He had already made his opinion of Julian clear during the wedding planning, but Julian thought he'd at least fake civility in public. Still, Julian didn't react. He just kept talking to the people he was with. It was Sophia's day. He wasn't about to let some ego-driven snob ruin it for her or for him. Some things just aren't worth the energy. A little while later, during the reception, one of the organizers walked up to Julian and said, "You're up next for a short speech." Julian was like, "Wait, what speech?" Apparently, he had been added to the lineup without knowing. At first, he thought about declining, but then he figured, why not? Sophia deserved to hear from him on her big day. So, he walked up there, grabbed the mic, and took a breath. He hadn't prepared anything, so he just spoke from the heart. He started by introducing himself. "Hi, I'm Julian, Sophia's brother." A few heads turned, mostly because many people probably assumed their parents would be up there instead. Then he said, "I wasn't just her brother. Growing up, I became her guardian when I was barely out of college." You could feel the shift in the room. People started paying more attention. He shared how they lost their dad unexpectedly in a car crash and how that flipped everything upside down. Sophia was still finishing high school. Julian was just wrapping up college. They had no one else. Their mom had remarried and hadn't really been in the picture for years. So, it was just the two of them. He talked about how he juggled multiple jobs to keep them going, how he sacrificed a lot, including relationships, to make sure she had the life she deserved. Then he casually mentioned, "All this while, I was also helping build a startup from the ground up." He glanced at the door and smiled. "Shout out to my co-founder who just got here, fashionably late, as always." There was a pause in the room, that kind of pause where people are processing what they just heard. The energy shifted again. Julian didn't say it to show off. He said it to give context, to help people understand why his bond with his sister runs deep and why he was proud to be standing there, watching her begin a new chapter. He ended the speech by saying how happy he was that she found someone who loved and respected her, and that he was confident she was in good hands. After the speech, Julian stepped down and headed back toward his seat. Before he even got there, guess who was suddenly interested in talking? Yep, the father-in-law. This time, he was all smiles, like they were old friends or something. He made a beeline for Julian and his co-founder, shook both their hands firmly, and started praising their software like it was the best thing since sliced bread. "Your platform's been a complete game changer for my company," he said. "I've actually been trying to buy you guys out for a while now." Julian just nodded politely and said, "That's good to hear. Maybe we can talk business sometime after the wedding." He didn't want to get into anything heavy right then. But then the father-in-law leaned in and asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were a co-founder when we met?" His tone wasn't accusatory, but you could tell he felt blindsided. Julian turned to face him fully, looked him in the eye, and said, "Why should I? So you could fake being nice to me." The man froze. Julian just said it plainly, and then walked away, leaving him standing there like a man who just realized he misjudged the wrong person. So, where do things stand now? Well, to keep it simple, nothing changed on the surface, but everything changed underneath. They never sold the company to Sophia's father-in-law, not out of spite, but because it just didn't feel right. He tried to buy them out before, and Julian knew he wasn't coming from a place of genuine respect. It felt like he wanted control, not partnership. They stayed the course, and the company grew on their own terms. Funny enough, his company still uses their software, still pays the license, still sends support emails. They treat him like any other client, professional, polite, but nothing more. It's strictly business. What matters most to Julian now is that Sophia is doing great. Her husband is respectful to Julian, even after everything that went down with his dad. That says a lot about his character, and honestly, That's what gives Julian peace. Whatever awkwardness there might have been with his family, Sophie is happy, and for everything they went through, that's all Julian ever wanted. Now, Julian wants to share a few things this whole experience taught him. Lessons he carries with him every single day. First, never assume someone's worth based on what they look like or what they tell you. You really don't know what someone is carrying or what they've built from scratch. Julian has walked into rooms where people looked past him like he didn't matter until they saw the title under his name or recognized the company he co-founded. That kind of respect is empty. If you can't respect someone when they're quiet and humble, your respect doesn't mean anything when they're successful. Second, respect should be your default, not your currency. Don't give it only to people who can do something for you. Don't wait for someone to prove they're important before you start treating them right. You don't lose anything by being kind. You lose a lot more when you're not. And finally, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one keeping it together for everyone else. They're the ones carrying weight you don't see. So, next time you feel the urge to overlook someone, pause, ask yourself why, and maybe just choose to respect them anyway. To wrap this up, Julian will say this: true respect isn't something you demand or buy. It's something you earn through how you treat people, especially when no one's watching. Status, money, power, those things fade or shift, but character sticks. The way you talk to people, the way you carry yourself, how you respond when you think no one's paying attention, that's the real definition of who you are. Everyone has a story you don't know. Be humble. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or reminded you of something you've experienced, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for sticking with him, and he'll see you in the next one.